What's up everyone? Alex here. This review of Trails of Cold Steel 4 will contain spoilers to the conclusion of Trails of Cold Steel 3, so if you haven't finished that game or have yet to play any game in the series, I highly recommend checking either my review of Trails of Cold Steel 3 or my video titled Which Game in the Cold Steel series should you play first? With all that preamble out of the way, let's get into the review. Anyone who's ever finished Trails of Cold Steel 3 knows the agony and sorrow that awaited them at the end. A cliffhanger ending with no word or mention of its follow-up announced for Western Shores. This latter part is important, as the Trails series has had a long history of localization challenges. Much like Class 7, players who witnessed Cold Steel 3's ending weren't sure when they'd see the saga come to its full conclusion. That is, until news of Cold Steel 4 arrived in April 2020, announcing its release later in the year. Many months and hours later, I've finally gotten a chance to play through this exciting follow-up to the events of Cold Steel 3, going into it with only one question in mind. Saddled with wrapping up the Cold Steel quadrilogy and the entire overarching story spanning all the way back to Trails in the Sky, does this ambitious finale deliver a satisfying journey to this massive ongoing saga? Trails of Cold Steel 4 is the exciting conclusion to both the long-running Trails of Cold Steel series and the overarching story that began with Trails in the Sky, developed by Falcom and published by NIS America, who provided this review code. Due to the combined efforts of numerous organizations led by Chancellor Gileath Osborne, the Phantasmal Blaze plan was successfully executed, bringing about a great twilight that plunged all of Erebonia in a dark miasma. This singular event led to a declaration of all-out war with neighboring Calvard and a mandatory conscription of Erebonia's citizenry. Caught in the middle are the members of Thor's Military Academy's Class 7, who, in the final moments leading up to this fateful event, witness a friend's tragic sacrifice, triggering Reen to unleash his ogre power and driving him uncontrollably berserk, ultimately leading to his capture. As Erebonia draws closer to war, various factions led by Estelle Bright and Lloyd Bannings continue to work behind the scenes in a final attempt to stop the war from happening. Meanwhile, the former Class 7 try to recover from their devastating defeat, lamenting the disappearance of their longtime leader and friend as the gears of destiny continue to turn. Because this game is in a unique situation of being a direct sequel to Trails of Cold Steel 3, instead of going over elements that have generally remained on par between both games, this review will be focusing on talking about changes to the combat, progression systems, and the total shifts and alterations to the game's narrative structure, without spoiling its story, of course. The most noticeable change you'll encounter in Trails of Cold Steel 4 lies in its combat and progression systems. Simply put, both of these systems are an amalgamation of mechanics from the previous game, with some returning from Cold Steel 2. For starters, Brave points now go all the way up to 7 as opposed to 5 in the previous game. While this might sound like this higher point cap will allow you to repeatedly use some of the more powerful Brave orders from Cold Steel 3, I'm afraid I have some bad news. All orders have been tuned and rebalanced. What this means is that Yuna's Sledgehammer, for example, will now cost 2 BP instead of 1 and will now only deal 150% break damage as opposed to 300%. That said, new to Cold Steel 4 is the ability to upgrade certain orders by way of trial chests, which make their return from Cold Steel 2. These trial chests function much like they do in said game. You're given a specific set of party members to use in order to take on a group of monsters on a battlefield, which rewards you with an upgraded order. Ultimately, all of these BP and orders changes feel more like a reaction to the overpowered state of some of the previous game's orders, and the higher BP cap doesn't really feel as significant of a change as it does on paper. The Orbment system in Cold Steel 4 has been revamped as well, with the ability to upgrade slots returning from Cold Steel 2, as well as the ability to equip Submaster Quartz returning from Cold Steel 3. Much like how trial chests remained unchanged, slot upgrades continue to serve a similar role in Cold Steel 4 as it did in its original implementation, and is meant to be a gating factor that'll prevent you from equipping more powerful quartz. But of the two changes, I find that the alterations to Sub-Master Quartz to be more meaningful, as every member of your party can now equip the same Master Quartz as their own Sub-Master Quartz. Other returning features from Cold Steel 2 include Lost Arts, which are powerful arts that spend a full EP gauge, as well as the ability to summon Panzer Soldats during combat, though this isn't quite as powerful as it was in their previous appearance. Finally, perhaps the most significant thing about Cold Steel 4's combat and progression isn't a new feature, but rather the presence of playable party members made up of characters from Trails in the Sky and the Crossbell games. With a large cast comes complications, however, as the exact same interface and tools exist to manage your party's quartz and equipment. I am personally someone who likes to meticulously adjust my character's quartz builds and go through each piece of equipment they're wearing, and I've literally spent hours making sure my characters are equipped with the build that I want them to have, rendering the present auto-equip functionalities useless for folks like me who like to do this kind of minutia. I do recognize that this quote-unquote problem is only unique to Cold Steel 4 due to its larger-than-usual cast and to my style of play, but I think it's still worth mentioning for others who play the same way. Perhaps a method to save and load a previous loadout would help cut down these tasks, but I digress. While there are numerous tweaks, additions, returning features, and adjustments made to Cold Steel 4's combat, much of its gameplay still revolves around breaking enemies, impeding powerful attacks, and the usual turn manipulation system you've been used to in previous games, and it's in this sense that, for the most part, hardly anything's changed. There's a comfort to be had with a combat and progression system that remains largely similar for the span of the series despite its permutations, and if you've loved these systems before and want more of it, then you'll enjoy what Cold Steel 4 has to offer. But for me, the biggest reason why anyone should play Cold Steel 4 is to witness the lead up to the series' climactic finale. It's through this lens that I find it necessary to talk about Cold Steel 4's narrative in relation to Cold Steel 3. This abstraction will allow us to understand the tonal shifts in Cold Steel 4 without ever needing to mention any specific beats in its story, allowing you to discover and appreciate these changes while still keeping the game's plentiful twists a surprise. In Trails of Cold Steel 3, Reen was given the helm of a brand new Class 7. This singular event triggered two things to occur. For one, Cold Steel 3 felt like a retread of familiar story beats from Cold Steel. This also forced longtime fans to temporarily abandon their hopes of a quick reunion with the members of old Class 7. While I don't particularly have much of an issue with the first part, it is the second part that I take umbrage with. I want to discuss this by briefly talking about another game. In Metal Gear Solid 2, Hideo Kojima wanted players to admire the series' protagonist, Solid Snake, from a distance by having the player play as a different character, merely interacting with him on several occasions during the story. While it upset many fans at the time, this new perspective served well to amplify the seeming impossibility of Snake's actions, with many players, years later, declaring this perspective shift as a stroke of genius. Cold Steel 3 tries to utilize a similar approach with the old Class 7, with said members occasionally teaming up with a new Class 7 throughout its story, only to leave shortly after the conclusion of their story arc. The problem with this is that you're not just dealing with just one person, but rather a fairly large group of individuals, which you're also given control of when you encounter them in the story. While I will always welcome the return of old Class 7, there are various gameplay implications that, in their own way, affect the narrative. For instance, when Laura joins new Class 7 early in the story, she's quite powerful and offers significant aid. However, when she returns to the party later, the game doesn't take into account the current strength of new Class 7, joining the group with only a few levels above them. Keep in mind that I'm not trying to argue that old Class 7 should be overpowered and, therefore, make the game easy, but this miscalculation downplays the years of experience Laura has over the new class from a narrative perspective. In other words, if the intention of these cameo appearances is for the player to revere old Class 7 and their abilities, this should be consistently reflected in their stats as well. Instead, these cameos serve to frustrate longtime fans who want nothing more than to play with their favorite members of old Class 7. It should also be noted that while Cold Steel 3 laboriously goes through new Class 7's backstories and histories, the group doesn't really truly come into their own until closer to the game's conclusion. And while there is a feeling of progression with this cast's thoughts and perspectives throughout, these aren't really challenged until the end, with the aftermath represented immediately once we catch up with them in Cold Steel 4. While I personally enjoyed Cold Steel 3's story despite these criticisms, it's important to bring these up because Cold Steel 4 corrects many of these issues. The conclusion of the previous game has, in many ways, sealed the resolve of New Class 7. That's despite them being scattered to the winds. This conclusion needed to happen for us to quickly empathize with this Class 7's plight, feeling defeated even after doing everything in their power to stop the phantasmal Blaze plan from executing. With that failing also comes a profound sense of loss, as Reen, New Class 7's instructor, is nowhere to be found. And yet, with his absence, Reen's presence is still felt by way of New Class 7. While Reen's relationship with the members of Old Class 7 helped shape him into the individual he is today, New Class 7, by way of his instruction, has come to embody all of the values and beliefs he holds dear, representing both his best and worst. Yuna's sense of justice, Kurt's dutiful sense of loyalty, Ash's brash demeanor, Altina's tactical prowess, even Muse's flirtiness, are all extreme representations of a portion of Reen's psyche, which ultimately allowed them to closely relate to him. So when the chips are down, it's no surprise then that it's not Old Class 7 that leads the charge. That task falls upon New Class 7. And that's despite having faltered at the end of Cold Steel 3. It feels so good to see New Class 7 ultimately rise up from their failures, leading a satisfying rally cry that unites all of Class 7 in a seemingly desperate attempt to undo the disastrous conclusion of the previous game. It's with this context that I now understand the choice behind New Class 7's smaller cast, with Cold Steel 4 allowing for ample opportunity to elaborate on what we learned of its members, as well as to finally provide time to properly catch up with Old Class 7. Best of all, the way Cold Steel 4 weaves Class 7 into the overall story feels more natural and better thought out than it was in Cold Steel 3, giving the game a helping of that good old JRPG adventure feel amidst its politics and machinations. But you just won't be playing with Class 7, because Cold Steel 4 boasts the largest playable cast in series history to date. While the game was billed as the end of Saga in Japan, I do think that its narrative beats and story feel closer to that of a reunion, with many of Trail's characters reappearing after being absent from previous games. It's through these appearances, plot twists, and reveals that despite the gameplay and story cadence feeling awfully familiar, that the game is able to give a sense of heightened importance in everything you do, ramping up to a grand conclusion that I'll leave for you to discover on your own. While the Trail series is many things to other people, a socio-political story for one, or a tale of hubris for another, Cold Steel has always been about the people for me, first and foremost. And despite some characters demonstrating unwavering yet questionable loyalty to their causes, in addition to the many fantastical elements that sometimes overcomplicate an otherwise fun plot, the ride to uncover the depth of the game's conspiracies has always felt enjoyable and satisfying, and it's from this perspective that I absolutely treasured and loved my time with Cold Steel 4. Despite what you've heard about Trails of Cold Steel 4, no one will ever prepare you for the inevitable conclusion of this saga. Right from the start, the bar is raised immediately, as you'll feel each moment with heightened importance, with a powerful desire to see this tale through to the very end. And while some will be tempted to pick apart the small things that the game didn't do right, and if its Japanese release is any indication, there's probably going to be plenty, I've chosen to recognize the entire adventure as a whole and appreciate the ambition and the excitement it delivers. Trails of Cold Steel 4 is a fitting conclusion to one of the longest continuing stories in JRPG history, and no other game will be able to deliver a finale like this one for a very long time.